like people to use anthropomorphic terms to apply it broader than to humans. But and it draws upon the process of semiosis that actually enables living organisms, from what I have studied to date, to have evolved and adapted through evolution by kind of integrating I'm not very good and proficient today because there's a kind of pollen surge and I've been working out, so my head is a bit in pollen right now. So, but the fact that the processing the signals that organisms catch from the outside help them understand and operate in their environment and cooperate with the other organisms that share the same domain and the same characteristics, plus the others that are not in their own species, let's say. And I believe that this, and we talked about it with Len, that there's such type of processes at play before living organisms at the molecular and at the physical level. So Len hinted at Miller's information, energy and matter. And I think this is where, yeah, the correspondence can be made. I don't know if I've been clear, but.
All right, thanks, Helene. Okay, let's see. Lynn, would you like to go next? You need to unmute yourself. Oh, I can do it, I think. Yes.
Got it. Okay. Hi, I'm Lynn Rasmussen. I first ran into general systems theory in 1998 when I was in graduate school at Saybrook. I've lived in Hawaii for almost 50 years. And so everything I've done has had to be from here. Unfortunately, because of the internet, I've been able to do stuff. And through the early 2000s, I had met Len Troncale. He set up classes at a distance, graduate classes at a distance from Cal Poly, and I helped do that. And we put together groups and we talked. And we talked about the various processes. I read up, I worked as a business and life coach, used it constantly, wrote a book called Men Are Easy, but it was all based not on psychology, but it was based on the logic of systems, how systems work generally. And it was very well received. I got a couple of book awards for that. And then said I'd never write another book. Then I just constantly read about system stuff and broke my leg about a year and a half ago, and then got inspired through Peter and Len again to write a field guide. So then I deep dove into, now that I'm 68 years old, I have a lot of freedom, and I deep dove into the basics of systems, and I've been writing this field guide. So it's taken me, it's gotten simpler and simpler in its structure and the writing style, but to get simple is difficult. It's a bitch. It's really hard. And you guys are going to help me, because evolution of I think I'm going to cover about 12 processes with descriptions and examples, go into depth a little bit more with features and functions, just listing them for other processes. And evolution, by the way, contains a whole pile of processes. So And there's so many, as we know, as what's being discussed, it's a tough thing to just, at this point, to summarize.
Mm.
So I'm depending upon you guys to, I've read your works, by the way, caught up. I'm catching up on the Third Way site. There are a lot of people on that site who have written things about evolution. I'm reading Peter Koenig right now again and putting it together with Haken's synergistics. So I want to kick in and help you guys by saying, hey, this is what these guys said. But I haven't quite caught up with that yet. So that's me.
Thanks a lot, Lynn. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, would you like to introduce yourself next? Maybe mention the stuff we did with Bill and Len a few years ago. That might be worth reflecting on as well.
Okay. My name is Tom Marzolf. I've been a software engineer and a software architect and a business architect. Spent my whole career in software development of various types, and did modeling the last few years of my career. I've been retired for about 7 or 8 years at this point. I first learned about systems, I think, in the late 1970s when I came across a Gerald Weinberg book. And it stuck in my mind, and I read anything in that related to that I came across. And since I've been retired, I've been spending a good bit of my time focused on that. I think modeling is very powerful, and systems require that you bring things together instead of breaking them apart. And that makes it more complex. So I think we need to integrate and unify. And to do that, we have to somehow master the complexity that causes. And I think that can be done with modeling, the right kind of modeling. So that's really what I've been focused on. Gary and Len and I worked together, I guess it's been about 5 years ago now, on doing, and also Bill, is that the name, Gary? The other
Is it Bill Schindel?
Yeah, it's Bill Schindel, yeah.
Yes, right. So I guess that's where I came in contact with Len and Gary. So we've known each other for a while. I've attended a number of ISSS meetings and a few IW meetings also, but not the last one. So anyway, that's sort of where I am.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Tyler, would you like to explain a little bit about where you are and where you're coming from and what your interest is in this? Hang on, I'll take you off mute. There you go.
Gary, I'm sorry, I missed something. Was I next? I was.
Yeah.
So I'm here because George read the review in Science Magazine of my book Quarks to Culture, and we had some really good conversations. Although the only other people and then Hillary and I were at the Lovelock turning 100 meeting in Exeter, England last summer, and it also turns out I had been to a meeting that Len was at when he was thick in the, well, for decades. I didn't know you were going to be thick in the systems things for decades, but I only went to the one meeting that was in New York of the System Society, somewhere in the, it was right after my PhD around 84, 85, 86, somewhere in there. And I had seen Len's, a little bit of Len's work, but also Tim Allen was there, and I was influenced by him and hierarchy theory. I come out of architecture school. I did not become an architect. I did my PhD later on a global carbon cycle modeling. I was really interested in integrating physics, chemistry, biology, planetary sciences with also an eye to the human future. And so there's social, political concerns. And I wrote this book, but in architecture school, I was very influenced by Bucky Fuller, definitely in terms of systems. Then later, Gregory Bateson at the Lindisfarne Foundation. I spent a number of weeks sort of in a small seminar with Gregory Bateson as he was writing Mind and Nature. His work was a big influence on me. I guess Teilhard de Chardin I have to bring up a little bit in terms of thinking of a continuity from physics to biology to human culture. And I teach in environmental studies in NYU and biology. I'm a faculty there at New York University. And I occasionally get to teach courses in unusual situations that have to do with systems. So right now I'm running a course called Systems, Patterns, and World Futures. It's really my book Meta Patterns as a kind of a group, a system of patterns one could use, because I can't really go through and make it a full survey for the students because I want to get them onto projects right away. But meta patterns are things like boundaries and binary systems, center versus dispersed, things like that. And then a number of years ago, I was interested in doing a follow-up to meta patterns. And I had this idea that one could start with the simplest things of the universe, quarks, and build, well, the fundamental particles of the standard model, and build up sequentially in steps. And that led to the book Quarks to Culture with these 12 steps. And I know one of them we were talking about today is because when I go from molecules to cells in one step, I even had a little PowerPoint to prepare. Len's got like, nine stages in there or something. And this is not a right or wrong thing. I mean, I say in the book that that depending on how you define the molecule, you can have molecules go into complex chemical reactions leading to cells. And I'm also, the stuff that Gary's brought up several times, that the difference between within level changes and scale changes that go up in terms of what I call combogenesis, but I don't mean it to be, I was thinking of its mainline emergence. I was really interested in the human body, and then the human body and social systems. So I was not dealing with stars or planets. I just wanted this one sequence of gradual buildup, which I'd be happy to, maybe we'll get into some of these discussions later, Gary. So I won't say anything more right now.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. Well, let's just continue this, because I think it's a useful time to reflect on where we are and where we're going and what we're interested in. So, Hilary, would you mind going next? Let me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started life doing a physics degree in Scotland, St Andrews, and then became an engineer and spent a lot of time working in optics, and then I became a systems engineer. And long after that, people started calling me a systems engineer. And so I thought I'd better find out what systems engineering was. So I got involved with INCOSE. And then I got involved with people like, I've forgotten his name, a guy at MITRE who wrote the book, Dwayne Hybertson, who is saying, well, look, all proper engineering is based on science. What's the science that systems engineering is based? Wouldn't it be nice if there was a system science? And he actually calls it systems engineering science to sort of move back from systems engineering to all the sciences that it needs. But at some point, I then got involved in the INCOSE System Science Working Group, and then with the IFSR conversations. And for a while, I was very confused because I thought that systems were things that came together and had emergent properties that the individual parts didn't. And then I discovered that a whole lot of people thought that systems were mental models and angrily denied that there was any systems in nature. And then I thought that, well, if we start seeing strange properties that we don't understand and then find that there's a real world system, set of system interactions causing them, that says that systems exist in nature. And I was quite strongly influenced by people like Derek Hitchens, who said a system isn't a system until it's got people in it and is doing all sorts of complicated things, or complex things even. And I got asked by INCOSE to head up the group of fellows that updated INCOSE's definitions of system. So we started off trying to get some sort of consensus, and then it became clear that wasn't going to work. So we then started looking at the world views of all the different, of the 60 or so INCOSE fellows turned out to have about 7 completely different and mutually almost incompatible views about what systems were. So we then we're looking at the fundamental difference between constructivists and realists, and the fact that in systems engineering you actually need to use both, because you are constructing real systems, but you're also doing a lot of conceptualizing and modeling and abstracting, so you're working across both. And that actually led us fairly deeply into trying to understand what the differences were, and I think we made some quite good progress, certainly as far as the Nicosia world is concerned. But I then, after the last IFSR conversation, when I met George and Gary was there, I read the Tim Allen book about hierarchy, and he is a very committed constructivist, and he had all these arguments why scientific realism was nonsense. And I thought, well, he's wrong, but he's got an awful lot of good arguments which the Derek Hitchens and Jack Rings of this world completely ignore and don't address. And then I worked out that the only way to pin this down was to see where you needed some continuous thread and nature of system formation from the very simple to the very complex. And of course, George had mentioned Tyler's work and Moravitz, and I knew a little bit about Len's work, but it was a while before I twigged that actually he and George and Moravitz and Tyler were using almost the same language, or different language, to describe what was essentially the same thing. So I think what my interests, or my driving passion in this, is to establish whether in fact the three of them are using different words to describe exactly the same thing. I suppose extract the common pattern that you find all the way up and back it up with the proof that Tyler and Len in particular, and also George, have been assembling. All of that makes a picture that says, look, these things really do exist in nature, and this is how it works. And we then abstract models of that to try and help us understand it, but there are real phenomena out there, and there's real evidence across a wide range of sciences, and that will... I don't have any great desire to write this up myself, but I'm very keen to see somebody do it so that we can stop these ridiculous arguments that you see people having about systems and start helping the rest of the world. So that's me.
Thanks, Harry. Yeah.
And I'm also doing a deep dive into economics at the moment, and having decided that current economics is rubbish. Modern monetary theory seems to have something going for it, but it's not complete. And George has written a couple of nice chapters in his draft new book about economics. I read the first one, and I'm trying to get into the second. I kind of burnt my brain out earlier this week trying to reverse engineer the whole of economics in 3 days, and still recovering.
Yeah. I'm just going to say a few words to build on what Hilary said. I mean, what I'm really hoping to achieve with this group and this expanding group is for us to have a shared orientation, a shared map, a shared landscape that allows us to communicate and work together to share our understanding of system stuff, so that we can start to actually form a genuine system science, a science which shares an orientation, which has shared patterns, which has shared principles, which can underpin not just our systems engineering, but all our systems practice. That's what I'm really hoping that we can achieve. And I think this is just one of the essential building blocks that we need to have. And you know, I've seen the work that Lynn has been doing, summarizing stuff, and I think that kind of approach is very valuable. And I want to take that forward and integrate that kind of stuff into our, for instance, our systems engineering body of knowledge, section 2, the systems foundations, which is a part for which I'm the senior editor. So that's my ambition. You know, a shared vision, a shared landscape of system science that we can all work within. George, would you like to go next, and then we'll move on to Len.
Yeah, just a few words. So I started out basically wanting to have a better description of what a system was, and you know, came up with some mathematical approaches to that, ironically based on, or initiated by George Clear. And he and I had two entirely different views of the world. But in any case, what I got into was, well, the question of where did these systems come from? If all these systems share these various properties, what I call the principles of system science, but you know, they're heuristics. But how did this get to be? And so I launched off writing chapter 2 in this new draft book on ontology. And that led me to say, wonder about ontogenesis. How did they get there in the first place? What brings things together to make this more complex? So I was probably following a similar evolution as Hillary described. And so I got into that. I'd actually put that in the principles book as far as auto-organization and selection leading to biological evolution. But I hadn't really thought it through in terms of, well, what are the details? And then somewhere along the line, I read Tyler's book. Actually, Tyler, I read the book because of the science review. And so I just like, oh my God, this guy's doing the same stuff. So I got in touch with him, and then at the last ISSS, I attended Len's evening presentation on his, help me out here, unbroken
sequence of systems origins, USSO.
Right. Right. I think ontogenesis or combogenesis is a lot simpler, Len, but there you have it. And anyway, that's when the idea went off. I'd been talking to Tyler via Skype several times, and that's where the idea came from to form this attempt to try to tease all these different ways of talking about what I think is fundamentally the same thing, and try to drive toward what is it that causes this to happen? What is the fundamental principle of why things keep coming together and then keep coming together at the next level and then keep coming together and so on, because that leads to perhaps a good solid principle of systems engineering, systems design and systems engineering. And I haven't finished that chapter yet, but that's chapter 14 in the new book, is to take all of that, those ideas about ontogenesis and combogenesis and unbroken sequence, and try to fold them into a process of doing engineering. So that's where I am.
Thanks, George. So, Len.
Well, let's see. I'm looking up something on Amazon right now. And then one of the things I wanted to say is under books, and it's not in Amazon though, but I came across a book that was titled Combogenesis. Have you ever come across that before, Tyler?
Len, blew my mind when you said that. I haven't had a chance to look it up. I figured it was pretty obscure, and so it's not on Amazon.
No, it isn't on Amazon. I just checked. And I think the reason is that it just wasn't picked up. But I think you should try to get a copy of that book. I'm going to try to get a copy of that book and see why it just didn't catch on. It was in the 80s, I think, and I have to now find the reference to it and the book review that was also in Science or Nature. I came across your book review, which was written by an English professor, not a natural scientist. It's very, very interesting. I think you lucked out on that because the scientists would criticize everything. But
everything?
The humanities people have a much broader view of the world, and there was a possibility there. So anyway, I think that was a good review too, but I'll try to find the other one for you and send it to you, okay? I wanted to actually serve here and not interfere as I have been so much, I think, because I said I did all this before. back in the 70s, but and so I apologize for that. But Hillary just mentioned something about economics. He's doing a deep dive into economics, and I wanted to refer to him, Sunny Oyoung. It's hard to spell, but she's a physicist, a well-known physicist, maybe not so well-known. And her name is capital A-U-Y-U-N-G. And the reason I refer to her is that she wrote an entire book that compared economics to, basically she was doing general systems, to economics, to physics, to biology, I think. And I think you might find that, Hillary, instructive. I also would refer you to Howard Odum, who was big on systems, general systems, because he was very active toward the end of his life on what is called ecological economics, which at least compares economics with biology. And then look at the Miller lectures that Peter Tuddenham, I thought he was going to be in this group, just distributed to us, because there's 2 Nobel laureates in economics there. And of course, interviewed by James Miller, they definitely had a systems orientation. So those are 3 sources you might want to look at for economics and systems, Hillary. And of course, we can communicate outside of this group by email at any time to do that work. I don't really have much to say, except I have with me here on the right side, and I guess you can't see it, but let me see if I can. See that? I have 80 files on each level, and I'm now going through literally 2,000 reprints that I have, maybe around 3,000, to sort them out by individual levels of coming into being of systems. I quite agree with Tyler and with George that we're talking about the same thing and have been talking about it for a long time. And with this book, Combogenesis, which I can't wait to get my hands on to see what he was thinking of way back when. And all the people you mentioned, Tyler, and everyone who's mentioned people's names, I knew all those people and worked with them to some degree. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, very few people cite him because he was such a mystical writer, and went on into, actually his books were condemned by the church, which attracted me to him right away since I went into the seminary for a while. In any case, we're all trying to serve the world, and whatever it's called, ontogenesis or combogenesis or concrescence or whatever, it's basically the same thing. And presumably, we all keep coming up with this because it's the next step in human awareness that conflicts with our being centered on just humanness and beginning to see that we're part of a much larger scheme and just in one position in that scheme. So I am busy at work right now doing these reprints and putting them on Excel spreadsheets so you have the references. So at some point in time, I may be having these 3,000 reprints in my office, but you will have the references to them. Not that you can do much with 3,000, there's too many, but, and eventually it'll get into one of the books. So George was bugging me about 2 books, but I have 12 books started and probably will never finish. Thank God for the world. Huh?
Len, just a moment, Tyler. Len, so one thing that you could make explicit, what is it that you would really like to, or really hope to achieve through this group?
Well, I think the group is working on the same thing that I have been working on for maybe half a century, which is since 1970. My very first paper for ISSS was, and Tyler, you'll love this, Origins of Hierarchies by Systems Field Axioms. Origins of Hierarchies. So I've been working on hierarchies on the empirical sense as well as the theoretical sense for 50 years. And I basically recognize that all of you are working on the same things in the past couple decades. And it's not just us. Tyler didn't mention, but he was a keynote speaker, I think, in David Christian's Big History. And Big History is essentially the same thing we're doing also. So that's a fourth group that we don't have represented here. And Christian's work is funded in the millions of dollars by Bill Gates, of all people. So it's very interesting. So what do I want out of this group? Basically, I want them to recognize past work, of course, but also to incorporate it and to have several different levels and different mechanisms by which this occurs. There's strength in our varied approaches, big strength in our varied approaches. Each will appeal to a different audience at a different level. And so I'm hoping we can tie them together with references. I mean, Tom is using a modeling approach. Tyler is using a kind of a, well, he's got a history already that's established of looking at the whole grand sequence. And we should tie these to the grand sequence that was done by Lovelock. A couple of you mentioned that you were at their meetings, Hillary and Tyler did. And so that's a much larger group of people that might become interested. I'm trying to get the natural scientists interested in it and seeing what they could get out of it. On those series, my specialty is the origins of the eukaryotic nucleus. And it's quite different from the current theories. And it's empirically testable. In fact, I have a graduate student who's growing an organism that's trying to work on it now. And I have at least 1,500 references just on that one level, not talking about all these other levels. So I admire the approaches that simplify it, but at the same time, I'm trying to see the mechanisms by which each one gets to the next one. And to do that in not too general a sense, I require that I have to have the specifics. And George Mobus is doing it on the general level. And so we've got different approaches. So my hope is that we'll keep referencing each other. And when you reference each other, you bring other people, just like we are just doing right here. Each of us has a different experience. And so we can refer to each other, like I just did with economics and the general systems, referring some possible routes to or sources to Hillary. We can bring others into this grouping that recognizes this. Does that, I guess I'll end with that sentence because that kind of answers your question.
Thanks a lot, Len. Appreciate that. Okay, Tyler, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Well, since some substance started coming up about combogenesis, ontogenesis, concrescence, I mean, we might want to go into that a little bit. And since there's been some allusions that some of us are thinking about some similar things, and I agree, I would have some comments along those lines that we could start with. But Gary, I have to defer to you as the host here, and.
No, so I'm very open to people's suggestions about how we move forward. I mean, what I'm really hoping to achieve, what I'm really hoping to happen, is that we will have a piece of work that we co-create, that we can publish, you know, in perhaps a journal article. I think in order for us to be able to make progress towards that, I think we do need to come to an understanding on key terms and key meanings. You know, we can recognize the diversity of different terms and how these things all essentially mean the same thing. But I think that there's a lot of value in us agreeing a term that we are going to use in our system science, you know, more broadly. You know, so, okay, Tyler.
I just make a couple comments, and I think I can bring in Helene's a little bit too on semiosis, if I'm saying that right. So let me just switch over to a PowerPoint, Gary, and I'm going to try to keep this short, but I'm going to do a share screen here, okay? And Helene wants to say something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to say something very short that maybe is going to connect what Hilary is working on and concerned about, you know, the constructivist realist thing, because in this integration and diversification, there is a process where there's some form of culture that is constructed within niches or within domains of cooperation or co-interaction or domains of interaction. And I think that bringing this into consideration at the combogenesis, or I mean the bigger process level, maybe can help get out of this deadlock of the constructivism and realism, and find a way to see constructivism in a non-postmodern, you know, in a non-deadlocking way. I mean, to get out of that.
I mean, I like to think that we did that in principle in the system definitions we published out of the Fellows study. I can give you the link to that. It's on the INCOSY website.
Yeah.
But I think the issue you're left with, sorry, okay, from the practitioner's point of view, it's kind of solved. You need both. From the deep theorists in the constructivist system science camp, clearly they won't be convinced by some engineers, and that's why. So that's why I think the if you like, the scientific aspect of it is still important to get it generally.
Yeah, but there's a scientific process of construction of the actual what is constructed that the constructivists are bringing forward. That's what I want to get to. I don't know if I'm being clear.
Okay, I'm gonna put that conversation on hold now, because I know that there's a rabbit hole waiting for us. Okay, if they could go back to Tyler and his suggestion to share a short presentation.
So I want to say, I'd like to say, I have to unmute. I forgot. Okay, I'm fine. I just want to say a few things that it'll be my current understanding of combogenesis, George's ontogenesis, Len's concrescence, and then maybe they can respond. And I think it relates to Helene's emphasis on what I would tend to call relationship in my work, what you're calling the semiosis or responsiveness. So I'll show a few things here. Some of it was geared toward the fact that we were going to be talking about going from molecules to life and trying to get steps in. But I just, to show, I guess I should show the whole slide so it's big as possible. So this is from my book, and this is how I was conceiving combogenesis, of things that have a certain relations combine on the right, and you form a larger thing with the wavy lines going out from it, new relations. And this is very important. I mean, this is in a way, it's classic emergence, but I had a certain way of looking at it because I wanted to start with the small things and work up in sequence toward the human body, and then the human body and social systems. So I was not so much interested in stars, even though stars give rise to the nuclei. They're very important, and I do go into that. But I was just curious, could one count the number of levels defined in this way? So that I really had a question in mind. It wasn't trying to, do more than that. But this diagram, and then when I did it, it led to these 12 levels that I try to talk about in the book, about what are the new relations on each one that could serve as a platform to create the next one that could not have happened by skipping levels. Now, if I go back to this diagram, what I understand about George's ontogenesis is that George, I think but you can come in later, that that this is basically your George's ontogenesis, but my combogenesis would be, I think, a subset of George's ontogenesis, because George is also doing stars and planets, and clearly when matter comes together at a large enough concentration of the hydrogen, you can get nuclear fusion and you can get something new that a star has. But I was interested in only, so I would say the combogenesis is a subset of ontogenesis, and what I was calling this grand sequence could maybe be like grand sequence ontogenesis or something, because it's strictly in order from small to large, understanding that ecosystems, planets, stars, they come in on this as various contexts, contexts. But I just was curious, and how many levels, and some of this you'll recognize as the major transitions of evolution with the biologists, and then there's physics, and then there's a reinterpretation of agriculture and geopolitical states from a viewpoint of combogenesis. But I'm not planning to go into that today, of why those tend to be steps defined by combogenesis. Now I wanted to show a little bit, and I was this is not in the book, but I was a sketch from my notebook where I was distinguishing between levels defined by combogenesis, or it could be ontogenesis as well, versus changes within a level that would be let's say the organs in the body, and forming once you have multicellularity. And I want to show a little bit about Len's, and then there's 3 dynamical realms. I wanted to talk about why I define molecules. I go right from molecules to life, but I wanted to show a bit about Len. So I was thinking, well, let me just go back, because I have molecules going right to prokaryotic cells, and because I didn't feel confident enough that some of the science wouldn't be there and how that transition happened. Now I lumped macromolecules. Now obviously Rubisco in photosynthetic organisms came into being after you had a cell. So this would be one of the examples of something happening within the level of the cell, complexification within that thing. But if I was willing to define molecule by the first non-spherical entity that has a topology of charge distribution around it, that can then give rise to chemical reactions, and therefore it gave me the ability to lump all molecules together. Now, not all molecules form before the prokaryotic cell, but the molecule is a type. Some molecules had to form before the prokaryotic cell. And then some others come into existence once you have the prokaryotic cells. Now, one thing I see is important so I have atoms, molecules, prokaryotic cells, is the movement from simple chemistry to a sort of a replicative chemistry, what Stuart Kaufman gets into with these autocatalytic loops. And so there's a kind of chemical evolutionary dynamics. I'm very interested in the concept of evolutionary dynamics we have propagation, variation, and selection. And once you have prokaryotic cells, you have now biological evolution. But so to open this up, so this person, line weaver, has got monomer world to oligomer world to macromolecular world. I happen to like Addie Pross going from thermodynamic stability to dynamic kinetic stability. So these different people are looking at the in-between steps of not just molecules to cells, but what I'm interested in today is whether there could be some discussion of, do we clearly see steps of combogenesis happening in this main sequence, ontogenesis from molecules to cells. Now, Len, at the upper left there, I pulled this out of his diagrams, and I tried to put them together into one to try to go from the inorganic compounds on his upper left. But notice he has, Len, you have got atmosphere and continents and ocean. So I was not, and it's fine. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but I was trying not to, I wanted to only do a sequential buildup of types. but then you've got organic monomers form, organic polymers form, concentrations of polymers, short metabolic pathways, first nucleic acids. I mean, some of this, I know you're putting this out hypothetically. You've thought about the science though a lot. Coupling of genetic and metabolic systems, the integration into cell nucleus, polymers form, organelles, cell cooperation into colonies. So here we start getting into maybe the multicellularity. So you've got like maybe 7 steps there of concrescence, which are, my understanding, are all buildups from small to large, even though in the atmosphere, continent, ocean, where you also have maybe carbon dioxide here, simple molecules, there's kind of a mixing of the micro and the macro. So I'd be curious how you deal with that. So anyway, that and some of this I think relates to Helene's work with the I think I have a picture here of this, where there's it's kind of a, I guess I would see this as a great progress in what I would tend to call relationships. I like the word relationship because it's general enough and it can include atomic relationships and relationships of organisms and human relationships. So I tend to use the word relations, things and relations, but that's just a personal preference. So Gary, I think I don't want to go on too long. I just brought up some issues. I was trying to tie together and ask some questions about combogenesis, ontogenesis, concrescence, but then I also thought about Helene's work with the semiosis.
Thank you, Tyler. I really appreciated that. I think it's great to be able to build up those visualizations from lots of different sources to show an overall story. Len, did you want to jump in and make some comments on that? Hang on, you need to go on and I'll need to unmute you. There you go.
Oh, okay. I was writing while I listened, and I wrote this down as a summary. Combogenesis emphasizes the process, the combining process. Ontogenesis emphasizes the products, because ontos means individual entities. And that's the 2 things that Volk and Mobus are working on. I would claim that if you combine the USSO and the TOE, the theory of emergence, it emphasizes both the processes and the products. And in answer to what Tyler is saying, I want to bring up several other conundrums, Tyler, not just molecules to the first cells. But I want to explain the reason I put in atmospheres, because when I did this process as a course at UC San Diego, I had Miller and Urey, Nobel Prize winners, who talked about the origin of life molecules in both the audience and as speakers. And at that time, origins of life was quite different from presented by Morowitz and Mobus, not Morowitz and Smith recently. And that is because the geologists and the physicists changed their opinions about what the early Earth atmosphere was. And that caused a change in the experiment that Miller got his Nobel Prize for. He got his Nobel Prize for combining electrical charges with reduction atmosphere, which was thought to be the atmosphere of the early Earth. But it turns out that now they've changed that, and so they don't think it was a reductionist atmosphere. That changes the whole picture, and that's just one conundrum. Another conundrum I'm going through is stars. What comes first, galaxies or stars? Neither one, because they both originate at the same time. So the entire USSO, as well as Mobus's work and Volk's work, is a little bit of a fraud, if I may say so. Because what we're doing is we're actually putting things together to see a sequence. Remember, I call mine unbroken sequence, right? When it's not a sequence, it doesn't occur quite like that. And that's just the reality of the scientific evidence at this point. Who knows if it's going to change? Over the years of my 50 years or half a century of looking at this, the age of the universe has changed too. The Hubble constant is no longer a constant that's we're told that it's actually increasing or decreasing. And so the age of the universe is changing. I started with 10 billion years and now it's at 13.7, but at one time it was 14 billion years. Now, mind you, we're talking in terms of billions, so we're talking about several hundred millions of years of difference here. And so I don't want to say we're all working on frauds. I'm saying we were struggling with some of these things about there being a sequence. Galaxies don't generate just stars, and stars clustering and aggregating together don't generate galaxies, but maybe the cosmic microwave background was the first asymmetry. And that's what we should be talking about. So we're all in this trying to work on it. And I don't think, and right now, basically, Volker and Mobus and me are competing because we want the process to be named either combogenesis or ontogenesis or concrescence. We don't want to give in to each other because we're big egos.
No.
and that goes back to what Hillary was talking about. We're talking about worldviews. So maybe it's not just our ego, it's our basic worldview that's involved, which even goes further back into our personalities. And so I hope I blew everything up here. But Gary,
no, thanks, Len.
Quite sincerely trying to get us together.
No,
but I'm
really,
just pointing out problems with it.
So what I'm going to do, George, is I can see your hand is raised. I'm going to go with Lynn first because I think Lynn made an interesting suggestion in the chat, and then I'm going to go to Hillary, and then I'll come to you, George, if that's okay.
What I said in the chart in the chat is excuse me, is that some real groundwork needs to be done, and that's I'm getting some feedback back here. What's going on in my okay, it stopped. What needs to be done is, for me to feel comfortable about all this, is to look at combogenesis, ontogenesis, Len's old papers on concrescence and counterparities and all the stuff that he and emergence, break it all down into systems processes among each of them. Now, I know, Tyler, you're not, and a little bit George, you're not accustomed to thinking, George is more, in terms of systems processes and what exactly that means. And that's how I'm describing things in my book. That's how Len how I've learned from Len on how to think. And if I can break these your different points of view down into systems processes, then it's much easier to compare them. Right now, you can talk back and forth, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. If I had a breakdown of this is what's included in this one, this is what's included in this one, and this is what's included in this one, then I can go, all right. And that's just sheer grunt work on my part. And I can see, and by the way, I'd like to throw synergistics and synergy into that, just to break it all down and to see exactly what that would be. It's just a time thing for me. And it's something I'm going to have to do anyway for my book. It's just in order to make this work for me. I can see it's coming.
Great. Well volunteered.
Darn. I didn't want to have to do it. I wanted you guys to give me an answer,
Yeah.
And what I'm going to have to do is just do my homework.
When it works for you, you'll write it down. It'll work for all of us, perhaps. Right,
exactly. And it's just like I said, oh, good 6 months of grunt work. So, geez.
We want to keep you out of trouble. And
I don't know.
Right. So Hillary, did you have some reflections you wanted to share?
Yeah, I got very interested in Tyler's sequence because it connected all the way from physics, which I thought I understood, well, I used to understand, to kind of stuff we're doing now. The other interesting thing is at the top of the sequence, the agro villages and geopolitical states only emerged during the Holocene era, and anybody who's looked at the graphs of how temperature is changing and CO2 levels are changing will appreciate that if there's a stability condition for complex human civilizations that says they need to be in Holocene-like conditions, then we are in bigger trouble than we thought we were about global warming. But the other thing is when, because I also I'm a dilettante, not a deep scientist, so I've done a bit of geology and a bit of other things, and systems gives you a useful lens to see how things fit together. But the thing that interests me is seeing, and a good example is certain technologies only emerged once we moved up certain cultural levels. So a whole lot of agricultural technology only emerged once you had agro-villages. All the sort of energy-based and information-based technologies only emerged once you had geopolitical states. And similarly, cells could only emerge once there was a high concentration of non-equilibrium chemistry going on. And so there's this general thing that steps up the combogenesis sequence seem to need a fairly complex ecosystem to happen in. And then once you've stepped up, that change probably reflects back into the ecosystem. And there's this, that there was a comment in, I think it is Smith and Moravitz, about ecosystems actually happened before the complex systems that exist in those ecosystems. And similarly, I took a while getting my head around the fact that Tyler went straight from cells to multicellular organisms without going through organs. But of course, the point is that organs only have any utility as subsystems in multicell. Organs only have any utility as subsystems in multicellular organisms. So it does make sense. So that another pattern, I think it's a pattern thing or it's a process thing, but this relationship between ecosystems and the systems that evolve in them, and then the impact back on the ecosystem. Do ecosystems step up their complexity in parallel, or do they just get messed up if the containing system gets too parasitic, I suppose? All of which obviously has a lot of implications in sustainability and economics and the human place on the earth. And there's one other thing. Oh yes, sorry, there's one other thing I'll throw in. And you can allow this to sync without trace if you want. But I've been reading Carlo Rovelli's book about time. And that spooked me badly because all the physics I was taught 50 years ago goes out the window. But it then, because the key message is that, and he's right, is that time does not appear in the fundamental equations of physics. And time is only meaningful when you have, effectively, time is measured by entropy, or the direction of time is determined by entropy, and the passage of time is determined by processes. And that leads to the thought that time is an emergent property of multi-level dissipative systems, which is quite a scary thought. But that if it's true, and it's only an intuition, and I don't know how to take it forward, but put that at the back of your mind. There might be something quite fundamental about time and the system universe we're trying to understand.
Right, thanks, Hilary. Interesting. So, George, you had a comment you wanted to make.
Yeah, kind of in response to Lynn's, we're competing here. What I saw when I saw Tyler's work and then when I saw your work, is I break it down a little bit like this. We'll start with Len's work, which looks at an awful lot of detail, huge amount of detail. And I can see what he means by unbroken sequence now. I would like to go into a little more understanding of the steps themselves. There's an awful lot you can't get into a graphic, just a slide. So there has to be some more verbiage, I think. But that's the detail, and it comes from his background as a empirical scientist. What Tyler has done, I think, is to give us the big picture and focus on sort of the major aspects, but more importantly, divide it into domains with specific dynamics that pertain to those domains, which help explain why certain patterns develop. What I'm interested in is the theory behind it. What is it that would explain all of those? And I don't claim to have it. I settled on ontogenesis simply because, as Len said, onto means thing. And where do those things come from? So I don't think we're actually competing. I think we have different points of view with regard to the whole thing. And what my hope was is that we could figure out a way to not just come to one. I don't think we need one term, actually, to be quite honest. If we make it clear what that perspective is about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, George. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think it makes sense, but I wish you would look at the theory of emergence a little bit more, George, because I encountered that same reasoning as you did, and I wanted to find the causes at the very beginning. And so even in 1972, I was looking at the causes that happened between the levels. And I think the theory of emergence, which I presented, which I would challenge incidentally, because I can't find a counter parity for every level. I just conjectured. Hillary, the word is conjecture in mathematics, and I think we should use it in systems too. Damn it, too many people of the past, these gurus, made their stuff laws, Deutsch's law, Eckhoff's law. It's all nonsense. Nonsense. They're not laws. They weren't proven at all. They're not based on a formula from physics. They are conjectures. And that's why I present my linkage propositions as a huge pile of conjectures, which the future has to work on. So I would say we are making conjectures. And I think, George, I would encourage you to go along with your mathematizing, that you're trying to do in that chapter. I think that's good, because I don't have a great deal of confidence in the counter parity theory of emergence or the whole concrescence process. I have conjectured it based on some levels. It's very solid, like on atomic nuclei and compounds and chemistry and periodic table. But that's because the chemists have done that work. I didn't do that work. The conjecture of the theory of emergence is another cause of each of these levels. And that's what I think you're going for, and I encourage you to go for it in a totally different way. Amen. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. Thank you, Len. Yeah.
No. Wait. Totally different way in what way?
Oh, you need to go off mute again.
You're mathematizing it, or at least I understand what you're trying to do is come up with a formula that explains it. That's a totally different thing than what I'm doing. And because I'm doing it kind of empirically based on what I can compare between the levels. I'm using comparative systems analysis. So it's really general systems theory, and you're mathematizing it, which I think is a quite different way. And I think it's good to have different ways of doing this.
Yeah. And
you have to concentrate more on the causes between the levels, not just describing.
What I've been mathematizing is more or less the definition of system, not how systems came into being. That's what I was hoping to come out of this conversation, to get closer to a theory of why systems come to be. Now, I'll make a deal with you, Len. I will read your theory of emergence. Well, actually, I think I've read one or two papers on that. The theory of emergence. If you'll read chapter 2 of my new book, I'm pretty sure you probably haven't dipped into that.
Good challenge. And I think you sent it to me about 4 times already.
At least.
Send it to me again. And amidst all these other things I'm trying to do, I'll try to do that.
I'll put the link to the master page, the reviewer's page, in the chat box here. You click on that, bookmark it, and then chapter 2 is the one that we're referring to now. Okay.
Accept the challenge.
All right.
Gary, incidentally, I just found that there's a chat going on the side. I didn't even know that. Is there a way to send us the chat by email?
I don't know, actually. I really don't know. I will have to do some experimentation. I'm not sure if the chat is recorded or not. Do you know, George? Have you had any more experience with this?
Gary, it looks like I can select the entire chat. It scrolls up. It looks like I can select the whole thing and just put it into a Word file or something. Or, I mean, you can, but it looks like it's...
Oh, you can. You can save the chat. There is a save
that's
chat.
what I was going to
Yeah,
say.
yeah. So before I end the meeting, I'll save it and distribute it.
Yeah, it's very important to do it before you end the meeting, because then it disappears
Yes.
once it's finished.
Okay.
I do French, go to French cafe conversation sessions every week, and we did the last one in Zoom, and I managed to capture the chat, which was the vocabulary before we stopped, but I wasn't sure when we'd finish, so I kept just copying more of it in. If the Zoom meeting crashes suddenly, I think we've lost it.
Right, okay. Yeah, so Tyler, I see your hand up. I just want to sort of capture some synthesis of what I've heard and where my mind is going as a consequence. So the little presentation you gave at the beginning, and the reminder for me again, you know, in terms of potentially 3 different types of things going on, 3 different types of processes that are going on in you know, this systems creation that's happening. You know, the going up, which you summarize in your Combogenesis, the stuff that happens in between, once a new level has arisen, you know, the formation of organs within a multicellular organ, for instance, within a multicellular organism, for instance, but also by adding more of the same stuff, you get the potential for new systems to arise. You know, so you as you add more and more hydrogen or helium, you know, to suns, the suns get bigger, and you get different sequences of suns, for instance. You know, different types of suns. You know, adding more neutrons and protons, you get different elements. Yeah. So, and then coming back to what Lynn was saying about, you know, examining the processes that are happening, yeah, and examining the patterns of the processes. Maybe there's something to be learned in terms of the general systems theory, yeah, and maybe there's then something we can then to latch onto in terms of building mathematical models related to these theories, related to these individual processes, and maybe Len has already identified all of these processes in his isomorphies. I don't know, but what I do know is that we've got to start building models of this stuff so that we can wrap our heads around it. So that's what I'm thinking at the moment. And you know, when I talk about us having a shared piece of work that we can publish, this is what I have in my mind. Yeah. So Tyler, back to you.
Right. So I put this in a chat. I don't really see George's formulas as trying to explain in a sort of a deductive mathematical sense, but trying to be a framework that one could slot in various understandings at these different levels, and it sort of serves as a framework. So that way I disagree with Len saying it's trying to explain, but it would take us down the road of what we mean by explanation, which is a tricky thing that I'm not willing to get into in a simple way. But I guess, and Len brings up these points about issues of galaxies and stars, and yeah, if you're trying to do everything in terms of an order and which comes first, we're going to run into issues in which the science is not even there yet. And I think we really get there with the origin of life. Like if the origin of life happened in these little cells within deep sea vents, and we don't even know that. And then there's sort of a boundedness in some of these molecular, some of Len's concrescences happened already within a system that directly led to a cell. Then they wouldn't be levels of combogenesis in the strict logic that I was trying to deal with. So I would be interested in Len, defining concrescence, probably for the 50th time, but whether it is a buildup of small to large with new relations. Hillary brings up ecosystems, and obviously ecosystems are really important. There's no life after the first cell without relations with other cells and creatures eating the dead, and even bacteria now can be predators and other bacteria. So there could be ecosystems in the bacterial level. And I think but to go into that, to try to put ecosystems and galaxies and stars in, might be worth setting some of that aside, because Len said, well, none of this it's all a fraud. And I take some, I would have to counter that a little bit, because I thought about these 12 levels that I published a lot. And I think I can make a case for the first types in each case coming before the next type, which is not so easy to do when you let's say, try to get into the evolution, ecosystems from the origin of life till today, or it's so tricky because the feedbacks between micro and macro. So I was just curious about first types in this main sequence, going to humans, and humans being in some elemental social systems, and then everything else becomes more complicated issues of surroundings, of systems and the surroundings that are going to impact this main sequence. There's no eukaryotic cell without the prokaryotic cells having been in a biosphere, for example, having been in a Gaia, if you like that word, and with atmospheric chemistry changing as a result of life. So I guess I would tend to see, I feel most comfortable technically, scientifically, trying to do some steps that can be clearly, I think, clearly argued. First types come into existence before the next type, and then subsidiary analyses that might be more problematic and messy, in which the micro to macro is just so integrated it's difficult to separate. We can try to build those around some kind of clearly argued sequence. And in that way, I was interested in whether some of Len's concrescence steps could be put into a clear, arguable sequence. I know Len says some of his are still hypothetical. Like I once put him on the spot about something, about one of his isomorphies, and Len said, "Oh, I haven't thought this through yet, fully." But he's offering it to us as a kind of a hypothesis, and I honor that his. And I liked what he sent out with the Word document of cores of stability and peripherals of instability, to try to look at how do each of these levels have variation. And I just got to say one more thing. I know I'm rambling just a little bit, but it's being so stimulating. When George is looking for a common theme, and Len is talking about concrescence, and these being mechanisms, I do think we need to talk about what are we talking about that can encompass everything in the universe in a system science. What's our language? So I asked Lynn in a text, is her bond as a system process what I call relation, a more general term? And Lynn said no, her bond was more the physical chemistry. And I asked, well, what birds relating to each other and things like that. So to me, thing and relation would be the basic ontology of what we're doing. I mean, I would really try to argue for that can encompass everything. It's a thing, and it has relationships. Now that word relationship is very, very general, but I think that's what Len means when he said it's a repeating mechanism. When you say mechanism, it's not a mechanism like Galileo's, law of free fall or something. It's a mechanism on a very general kind of ontological logic of some kind. All right, I'm going to end there. If that, those are thoughts, the best I can do right now.
Can I respond to the relationship thing?
Right. So let's see. So who would like to say something? So we have Lynn. I saw Helen. Oh, okay. Len and George. Okay, so Lynn first, then Helen, then Len, and then George. Go ahead, Lynn.
I don't know if I can. I want to say something about relationships. First of all, if we think of isomorphies, or we think of, and thank you, Len, this is all Len's, my interpretation of Len's stuff. If we think of everything in terms of systems, processes, or isomorphies, that there are patterns of interactions that make up all things throughout systems, then we get away from general terms like relations. That's a general term. I want to know specifically, I want to define specifically what those relations are, more in terms of general systems processes like feedbacks. Flows make up feedback. I would like to know information flows, how messages are being sent, and it's forming within the system, informing the next system, reducing the free energy in that system. There's all kinds of, I can shape shift what relationship means when we're talking about the birds tweeting at each other. I can shape shift it based on these various systems processes, and they're systems processes and isomorphies only if they exist, all the way from particles through, well, I don't know, quarks, I don't know, they get a little weird, through galaxies. And so, I mean, after what, 20 plus years of looking at systems processes and now writing these things up, I mean, really writing them up and looking for them at all levels, from atomic and molecular levels, through biology, through economic, social systems, and climate change. I mean, if you can't do that, then it's not a systems process. And starting to break everything down this way solves a lot of problems. It solves a lot of problems. Like when you guys were talking about the hierarchical levels, as I said in my email, when I started looking at hierarchies formed from networks, which Len totally gets, then it shifts my view of how everything's forming up. It's not this ladder. Everything is in a soup of networks within networks, and these hierarchies are forming as hierarchical networks. So anyway, I'm done. So anyway, these theories can be broken down, and these different points of view can be broken down in terms of these processes, systems processes, and then more clearly defined.
Thanks, Len.
Mm-hmm.
Helen.
Yes, I'm coming back to the concrescence, what it means. I think that the question was brought up, and when I was listening to the second part of the USSO, did I get it right, video, I heard Len do the simple etymological work on concrescence, saying together, growing together. So is concrescence some form of coevolution? Len, I mean, in the sense of sharing a domain of evolution, like what Maturana or others call structural drift or things like that, that things like move together and consolidate maybe in this movement. Just my question. Consolidate or integrate or.
So I'm coming next so I could answer that directly.
Yeah, go ahead, Len.
So Kreshko means growing and Khan means with. Growing together, yes, is a good definition in my estimation. Is this co-evolution in the Maturana sense? There is an aspect of it that is, because one doesn't get concrescence unless one is in an environment, and the environment determines what works or doesn't work. In other words, the other surrounding systems. So in a sense, it is within the same bubble, Venn diagram bubble, but it's not the same thing as. It's not exactly identical, I would say. In terms of my response to Lynn, gosh, what a good graduate student she is. She really does reflect this. I would endorse what she says about the specifics of relationship. Relationship is too general a word. It's like the word complexity and several other words that are in the lexicon of systems, which actually deter us from doing what Marzolf would want us to do, and that is model the mechanisms by which things work. So in the early days, I eliminated from the isomorphic systems process list all words like complexity and words like relationship in favor of having the specific things. And so I endorse what she was saying about staying away from general terms. And in fact, I would go further and say that it's the changes across levels that inform us what the word relationship really means. At one level, it's the aggregation because of simple gravitational attraction. At another level, it's binding between chemicals, like in compounds. At another level, like you were mentioning, Tyler, birds, and I'm glad that you brought them up. It transfers from Newtonian parameters to information parameters. And I studied by accumulating large numbers of these from the data on measuring these. And so information parameters become, and for us humans, information parameters become the dominant form of binding, not aggregation by gravitation or binding in terms of chemistry. We passed those long ago. And so I describe, and I'm trying to find a word for it, roots or precedences. In fact, I just came up with the word by going back to the Latin and Greek again of premonition. It's the basis for premonition. There are things which change when you go across these levels, and you can't see them unless you have the unbroken sequence of levels. And I would even go further, what Lynn was saying about breaking it down to the isomorphies, because I added to the isomorphic systems processes the whole set that came up when you have the unbroken sequence of origins, which you can't see and which the founders never saw because they were just comparing across real systems in the theory of emergence. Things like concrescence and central stability and peripheral instability. Incidentally, does this entire group, which I sent it to, have the file on my looking at just the genetic levels for central stability and peripheral instability? Because it should answer directly Tyler's really good question, how does it accomplish variation on each level? Because what it shows is, at least for the genetic series, which I know best, because that's what I taught for so many years, so I had to learn it right to teach it. for every single one of 14 levels, I show that there's a central stability, but the peripheral instability, or the thing which causes the variation, is actually specified in each case for 14 levels. So I can describe on the genetics level the variation rather easily. And I probably can for the galactic and the star levels too. So I added those ISPs to the list of systems processes or isomorphies. And that's how I get so many isomorphies. And with that, I think I'm finished, Gary. I think that's the comments I wanted to make on the past questions, as well as Rasmussen's and Finidori's comments.
Thank you, Len. George, I think you had a comment that you wanted to make.
Well, actually, I don't know if we want to get into this now because of the time, but I wanted to share a screen and just try to better define what I mean by a theory. Is that everybody up for that?
That's fine, George, please.
Okay. Okay. Some of you have seen this before, some maybe not. What I was trying to capture here were the sort of the principal ideas behind all kinds of, whether it's unbroken sequence concrescence or combogenesis and so forth. And this diagram really was the beginning of my trying to think about how to express this, not only visually like this, but in words, which are in the book, and then eventually come up with some sort of theoretical framework. So this isn't meant to represent any single transition from one level or from one process to another or anything. It's meant to capture the fundamental things, except that I do note a difference between biological and pre-biological because of the things that Hiller has mentioned, the fact that biological systems are dissipative and so forth. But what I called auto-organization is actually the closest to what Len calls concrescence and Tyler's calling combogenesis. The ontogenesis is just sort of the whole process. So auto-organization is where things come together, and they do so because they have affordances that permit them to form stable configurations. And that applies across all the levels that we've talked about, whether it's gravity or strong force or electromagnetic force and so forth, which leads to, when they do that, that leads to the emergence of new properties and affordances, and what Tyler showed earlier is those squiggly lines coming out of the combogenesis. And then we go through the cycle again, but on top of all of that, there is a ambient conditions, which includes other new entities, and what I call a milieu, which is things like temperature and pressure and so on and so forth. But basically, this is always acting on whatever comes out of this auto-organization, and only the most stable under those conditions, or those interactions with other entities, is what's going to go on to the next round. So basically, this is supposed to apply. The biological loop is replication with variation, which is a biological or neo-Darwinian evolution. But this is what I'm saying is what leads to, and I've got another view of it here, leads to this spiral of increasing complexity. I'm mentioning Teilhard de Chardin. He was the original inspiration for his term complexification. It's probably started me thinking about this stuff back when I was an undergraduate. So basically, any questions about that about this? So auto-organization is closest, I think, to concrescence and combogenesis. And then the selection process is actually, I view it as Len's peripheral instabilities that lead to the selection of, well, he's talking about in terms of divergence, right, Len? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this is more in the line of, you know, certain combinations of quarks become stable and in the environment of an expanding cooling universe, and they're with us, at least in the case of protons, for as long as we care to think about it. In the case of biological selection, we know that this has to do with fitness and all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to belabor this. I just want to try to clarify that for me, this is the theoretical framework that fits into this general picture. And where I see, what I see going on is that Len's and Tyler's work, you know, are different, are variations on this theory being expanded to real life kinds of things. I mean, I tried to capture that a little bit in this diagram, and I do talk about these various levels. So with that, I will, how do I stop sharing? So I hope that clarifies a little bit. I don't see it as us competing with one another at all. And let me mention, while I'm thinking about it, I had one idea while this discussion was going on. There are other authors out there, other scientists, other thinkers who have basically touched on a lot of these same things. What about a collected works book that would have a chapter or two or whatever from a number of different perspectives, so that, and you can use your own terminology. Len, you can talk about unbroken sequence. Tyler, you can talk about grand sequence, and I would just focus on the theoretical framework. So that's an idea I just wanted to put out there.
That's interesting.
Who are you thinking about others?
Well, David
I
Christian.
haven't gotten that far. I just formed that idea while we were talking. I mean, we would follow the standard procedure, which would be to put out a request for proposals, chapter proposals, and then try to collect them based on this sort of core theme of where do systems come from. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to draw up a list of prospective contributors. If I may, the thing that's sort of shaken my world a little bit is that discussion that was in the chat about system processes, and you know, system processes should be able to span all of the 12 different levels that are identified. I mean, I noticed in your diagram, for instance, you talked about biological, for instance, George. Now, what's sort of throwing me a bit is that what we were always hoping to do was by getting a better understanding of the systems landscape, get some more insight into what the hell do we do with the complex world that we're living in at the moment, and use that knowledge to do something useful. Yeah, if I may, in a second, Hilary. Now, I think in system science, I think that this is just what I'm thinking. In system science, I think it's very important for us to identify those universal system processes which span across all scales or all levels of systems, But I think within that system science, it's also important that we have an understanding of the processes and the principles within those individual levels and disciplines, because it's only by understanding both that you really do understand the big picture. So yeah, so I'm kind of shaken, but at the same time, I also think that we might have got a little bit more insight into the situation. Hilary, please rescue me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about the conjecture is that there's a core class of system processes that are common to all systems, and those are the defining characteristics of systems. My conjecture, based on the last time I looked at Len's system processes, is that some of those system processes, and in fact, I think you more or less said it, are found in a very wide range of systems, but they may be biological systems, or that's the impression I got. It may be wrong. I think that more of these processes kick in as you move up the complexity ladder, hierarchy, whatever you want to think. I could be wrong, but the question I'm asking myself, and have put in the chat, is it the case that every one of the system processes identified is found in every category of system, including subatomic nuclei and atoms and molecules? My suspicion is that generally we find more of them as we move up the sort of complexity scale, but I could be wrong, and I'm not close enough to them to be able to judge. But there's a parallel between that and a branch of systems engineering called product line engineering. If you're trying to make a family of cars with a lot of common components, what you do, if you look at the Volkswagen or Seat range, you'll find that there's common core components and platforms, as they call it in the motor industry. And if you're going to make a new car, then you put your own styling around it, and you do some specifics. So you find when you analyze product lines that typically there are components that are common to all of them. I can't think of a good example. In the case of Volkswagen family, there'll be standard interfaces to the engine. There will be standard modules that are used in some cars, but not all, like the hi-fi system and the 8-cylinder V8 engine and the fancy brakes for high-performance vehicles. And there will be components that are specific to one car, or maybe to one group of cars, like the SUVs throughout the whole car family. Another option you've got is if you're doing printers like Hewlett Packard and Epson, you have a core printer engine, which you'll find if you take apart 10 different printers. There's got some common components and some unique. And then there's other kinds of product line. I can't think of a really good example right now in which every part of the product is picked out of a standard catalog, so there are no custom parts. But in that case, no one product will use all of the parts catalog. And I have a feeling at the moment that the system processes are the last category, that you will find different blends of them in lots of systems, but that a subset of the so far identified system processes will be found in all systems at all levels of complexity. But that is a conjecture, and I don't have ready access to the data or the right mindset to probe that, I don't think. But I don't know. That's my suspicion at the moment. Len, you may have a better feeling for this because you've actually done the work.
Gary, can I respond to 3 things?
Sure, go ahead, Len. Yeah.
Hilary, first of all, I haven't done the work. I am doing the work, and who knows? I see all gray hairs around here except Helene and Lynn's, perhaps. And that means we're all at risk with COVID. Who knows? And Gary, you seem not entirely gray yet, but
Yeah.
we're trying to cause it to you. Well, first of all, I want to say that Hillary, please think in terms broader for the second law of thermodynamics and dissipation than biological systems. In my studies so far, all astronomical and physical systems are subject to the second law also. They are all dissipative. We are especially good at dissipation and rising complexification to harvest dissipation, but we are not the only ones. All of the physical world is too. Please look that up. As a physicist, you probably may agree with that. So not just biological, but we're pretty good at it. And that leads to the second conjecture that you made, or the observation that as our isomorphies may be concentrated in certain levels. And I agree with that, and probably promoted that in your thought process by coming up with those isomorphies. But increasingly, I can find them in all levels. But things like aggregation are dominant on the physical levels and astronomical, cosmological, and the chemical levels, but they take a different character. And that's why I say there are roots or premonitions of the higher level things like dissipation in the more complex systems. So I would say that, yes, it is true that the isomorphies have dominant regions or domains or levels that they are prominent in, but also I am finding evidence in these 50 files that I'm doing of them even on the former levels. And in some cases, that is instructive to the conventional reductionist sciences. For example, I never saw astronomical cosmological articles that had feedback, the word feedback in them, in my previous 3 or 4 decades. But now you find them often. There are feedbacks, or at least what they call feedbacks, in galactic formation and solar system formation because of the winds that are put out by the system, and they cause feedback in the future states of the system. So actually they're using those words now. They didn't use them before. So there were, you could say there were no feedbacks in physical systems in the early days, unless you were talking about human level physics like, you know, pendulums and things like that, but in the broader cosmology. But now you find them. And I'm thinking that in the long run, and I'm going to include it in the book I'm doing for Mobus in the Springer series, I have applications, and Gary talked about this too. He said in his last statement, oh, so what are we going to do with all this stuff? Can we apply all these isomorphies to our engineering? And Gary, the last IW, I put out a book of posters from my current 21 students, and I have a series on sustainability and a series from another set of engineering students where their charge was to apply one isomorphy to one industry. And I have now about probably 30 or so of such posters. Okay, let me do some self-criticism here. I don't think the students did a good job. Let's face it, they were just having their first course on the isomorphies and trying to apply it to their industry. Sometimes I did not see a depth there like there was in the rest of the poster, which came essentially from my notes. But at least it's a first attempt and it gives you some ideas. And I have 2 exemplars that I talk about where a commission of material engineers used hierarchies in biological systems to devise several recommendations for the material or the material engineering community in the future. And that's really pretty important. And I have another one which uses the obscure isomorphy solitons and applies it to things like lasers. Now, lasers have been used widely in industry. So there are exemplars as well as my students' attempts at posters applying. I might say Lynn and Luke Frenchu, my friend, have 3 posters on applying it to social systems too. Okay, that's all I wanted to say, was to react to those things.
Okay, thanks, Len. Right, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to draw this to a close at around about 12:30. So I suggest we all have one last round of thoughts and reflections. I'll come back to you last, Len, so you can have one last go. Yeah. Helene, would you like to go first?
Yes, I thought that was very interesting, and I hope we can continue to try and look at the different types of processes and how, you know, we can distinguish or not the information as mediation or the signaling and the semiotic aspects of it. To try and draw a continuity between the physical and the biological and the cultural. The other thing that I'd like to, that kind of thought that came to my mind listening to that is a notion of first order and second order. Is that sometimes we confuse processes that are the processes of looking into something or considering something that you find in communication or even in cultural systems. I don't know if I formulate that the correct way, but I think there's something to distinguish there. I haven't defined it very well, but sometimes, you know, well, it's again a question of, you know, the observer and not the observer, but as we are at the same time as humans, sometimes as social systems, the object of the study and the ones doing the study, we must make sure that the processes are quite distinguished, or that we know at which level we're talking about. And sometimes, if you look at semiosis, it's also a feedback between the different positions, or a feedback between the different orders or levels. So it complicates things, just as an aside.
Okay, thank you. Who'd like to go next? Just put your hand up. Otherwise, I'll pick. Okay, Hilary. Hang on, I'm just unmuting you. Or trying to.
I've done it. Yeah, I think that's been really useful. I think we've all learned something. And the thing that I think the most important things I'm getting out of it are the idea that ontogenesis and concrescence and convergenesis are probably different aspects of a bigger, or maybe it's all subsets of the concrescence, I'm not sure. But I think testing that with systems processes is really a good idea. I was just going to come back to Len about physical systems. Complex physical systems are certainly dissipative. It's the thing about an atom or a molecule is, if you project a molecule through space, it will be there until the end of the universe. If it doesn't have an unfortunate encounter with something that will actively disrupt it. That is not true of a biological cell. Other dissipative systems will dissipate and die if they don't have constant energy inputs. These very bottom level physical systems, as I say, if you manage to get one on a trajectory through the universe that avoided black holes and other things, it would have a chance of being there at the end of time, if there's an end of time. So there is a difference, and I think the whole business of dissipative systems is bound up with entropy, which, according to Ravelli, is an emergent property of systems too complex for us to model in detail, is effectively the way he puts it. So there's definitely something about dissipative systems come in somewhere as we move up this hierarchy. And yes, galaxies and star clusters, these are all very, very, in constructional terms, are very simple, but they still have thermodynamic properties. And you don't get dissipation, I think this is true, I'm not sure, until you're getting to the point you have thermodynamic properties, which are statistical aggregations of the properties of the individual elements. I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much. It's been really, really insightful, and I do hope we can move on. But I think the ability to start making clear statements about you find this subset of the set of identified system processes all the way up the grand sequence, and either they're all there, or you get more of them as you go up. And I think if we could answer that question, then we would have a very good outcome from this.
Thank you, Hilary. Who would like to go next? I'm gonna hold you until the end, Tom, if that's okay. I'm glad you came back. Thank you. Who else? Tyler, Lynn, George has dropped off. He's going to be back in a second, I hope. George, are you there?
Nope. Thanks, Helene. Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. I'm seeing more that there are subsets of phenomena that go out. Some of the questions that were happening. I'm fine with everything I've said. Bringing Tom in a little bit. He'll speak at the end, but Tom has been interested in his modeling of containment on one axis and type on another axis, and I think a lot of our discussion does involve the issue of types, of classes of things, all systems, then subsets of all systems, and we do have to address at some point, maybe on a common language, the issue of types. And I also thought that'd be probably useful to start turning out some papers on this. And it might not feel like we're not, but sometimes it's a little frustrating with the emails and people send things, and it's hard for me to follow like in detail everything about everything, and there's different directions going out. But it might be interesting to identify some particular journals. I mean, I know the journal that comes out of Hull, I think there's a journal called Systema, I think. I don't know if that's still going, but it might be interesting. I know, yeah, Nature or Science would be great to write something for, like a commentary. We could try to do that as a group. Of course, the papers, it'd be somebody wants to write something and the others could maybe write sections of it with their own ideas pertaining to that. Like a paper on types would obviously be something we're all sort of involved with in terms of, George's ontogenesis is a type, and my combogenesis, so I'm just going to leave it at that. I know, and we're already getting past time, and I know some other people want to speak, and Tom wants to say something, or Gary, you're going to have Tom say something. So thank you all. Really appreciate it. Yep.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tyler. Lynn or George, who next?
I'll mention a few things because I've already kind of said my last words for this meeting, and share the sentiments. It's been great. I really appreciate all of you very, very much. But what I did want to mention is I did send out an attachment to one of the last emails. Thus far, Tyler's the only one who's really kind of addressed that, but it's my continuing effort to try to make more rigorous the things that we're talking about. So Tyler just mentioned types and typing and things like that. And what I was proposing, there were two things I proposed. One was the concept of using equivalence classes within sets, because this is a very well established mechanism for finding types, and it forces you to define attributes. And one of the attributes that I proposed was a metric for complexity, that was very specific to Herbert Simon's model of complexity. And so I'm still looking for some kind of feedback as to whether or not that makes any sense at all. I've already incorporated it in the book. So I am going forward with it, but I really would appreciate any kind of feedback. So thank you all once again. It was great.
Thanks, George. Lynn, would you be okay to go next?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. This is also interesting, and it inspires me to just keep going with what I'm doing. Because I'm, as like George, I want your attachment. I want to take some time with that attachment and break it down from this other point of view, from the point of view of systems processes, which is what you're defining constantly and very well and quite beautifully. And so if we have a common language of systems processes, then what you are defining becomes even more rigorous. If we have this shared understanding of these things. And I think we're pretty close to that. I'm not, I'm far from a physicist, and this thing is requiring me to be more of a science writer and a generalist. But I think it's pretty powerful to be able to break everybody's things down and compare them. And I'm kind of excited about getting to that point. And George, yours is the energy flow, the use of information, the concept of information, of messages and information is so powerful. And I'm not hearing a lot about that. Tyler's alpha kits, information use among the different, how they're used at the different levels is really powerful. And there are new models for that. So I'm very excited about all this. Thank you very much.
So, a couple of things. So, I think I really like the idea from Tyler about putting together a communication paper on this. You know, it doesn't have to be huge, but something that that explains what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what our initial conjectures are. I mean, I really appreciated the little presentation you gave at the beginning, Tyler. I think you have a little bit of a gift for communicating complex things in a way which is easy to understand. What I would really appreciate would be if you could maybe find the time to think about the structure of what that paper would look like as a starting point, and then we could all hopefully work together on that as a team. But I'd really appreciate if you could do that. Just think about the structure, and I'd be happy to work with you on that as well. But I'd love you to take the lead on it if you would. I think George's idea about equivalences as a way of attributing complexity to systems, I think is again something that has a lot of merit. And maybe we might be able to tie that into the modeling work that Tom is doing. I appreciate the fact that Tom has been listening so ardently to the discussion throughout and has not said very much. And I'm really glad that you came back, Tom, because I guess you had some computer problems. But if you could perhaps put things from your perspective on what you've heard today, Tom, I'd really appreciate that.
Okay, yeah, my network connection died there, but I was able to restore it and get back in. Well, I continue to be impressed on how so many of us are trying to go in the same direction. And I see a lot of potential for us to continue to work together. And I very much agree with what I think Len said, that we're looking at things from different perspectives and with their different backgrounds. And that's a great richness. And I think that's very valuable if we can find a way to put everything together. The note about, I think, again, something else Len said about how so many things we don't know and so many things we're learning and changing. So however we model things, it has to be adaptable. It has to be able to be done incrementally over time. So I keep thinking about how all the richness of our communications here and ideas can be captured in a way that we can incrementally build something more complete and better. I have about a half page of notes. So I'll try to write up some. I articulate things better in writing, I think, than I do in speaking. So I'll do that. But I very much enjoyed the meeting. I hope it continues.
Okay, thank you, Tom. So last words from Len.
I said a lot already. Thank you. I thank you all for educating me and challenging me, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you. That's
Okay.
all.
Thank you. Okay. So I shall make sure I shall save the chat. You can all go on off mute now. And just say goodbyes.
Well, we can each save it as well, I think.
Oh, okay.
I tried. I tried. I thought I was, but then it didn't paste in. Is anybody else having problems with that?
Yes, I'm having the same problem.
It's not. It looks like I'm copying it all, and then I try putting it into a Word document, and I'm not getting it.
Yeah, same
it
here.
doesn't.
Okay. I have the chat saved in a folder. Maybe as the moderator, it gave me the option to do that.
No, it's stored in a very awkward place because.
Yes, Helen, yes. We all three little dots on the right. We all have we all can change it. There's three little dots. You can save the chat.
Yeah, but then you have difficulties to find it, so you have to click on find it in Finder or find it in your files, because it's not in downloads, and it's not, I mean, it's in a, where is it? It doesn't show in my...
Yeah, I have it.
I just copied and pasted it. I have it.
You're lucky. Right, so, yes, I've got it in my, well, I'm on Mac, so it's in Finder. I just did save the chat, and then it save chat, and then it said save in Finder, and it's created a directory for it. But where it is in my structure, I have no idea. It's meeting_save